This is the Elevate Construction Podcast, delivering remarkable content for workers, leaders, and companies in construction wanting to take their next step. Get ready to step out of your comfort zone with Jason Schroeder as he encourages you to do better, live a remarkable life, and expect more. Let's go.
Welcome to the Elevate Construction Podcast, where we accept feedback and continuously improve. My name is Jason Schroeder, and today's podcast is number 2 in a small series discussing how to implement on special and mid-sized projects. Today we will be discussing operations and schedule. So why listen today? Do you want to know the key items you must have to increase your effectiveness on site? Do you want a simple way to take your normal operations to the next level? Do you want to tailor the great things done on larger projects to special or mid-sized projects? Well, if you want any of these things, then you will want to listen today because we have a fantastic podcast for you. You'll love the content. So I'll start out with a quote. Operational excellence is about control and enforcement of the team's plan. Let me tell you a little story about that $15 million project again. And this time I want to relate it to scheduling. So on that project, we had a master schedule in P6. There was a Takt plan that summarized the overall project schedule, and we did do make-ready plans from pull plans, and we did have look-aheads, and we did have weekly work planning on the project site. But here's the key. Some of the foremen, some of the people that we brought into that project site did not have the time to really get used to the project. They weren't oriented as long as you would have on a larger project in the sense that they don't have months and months and months of being there. And sometimes they would come in for a day or 2 days or a week or whatever. They weren't there for a long period of time. So when we look at the overall planning sequence of, you have your master schedule and Takt plan, then you do pull planning with make-ready plans, look-aheads, weekly work planning, and then day planning, we had to switch those to visual systems. So here are a couple of things that we did. Number one, we kept the master schedule the way it was in P6, but we published the Takt plan for the entire project. So this was start to finish. You could see the mobilization, the foundations, the superstructure, interiors, exterior, commissioning, and the finishing of the plan. Anybody at a glance could come see the project schedule and the plan and understand it within 5 to 30 seconds. And that is a key litmus test for any project. Can you notice that plan within that amount of time? Even if it takes a couple of minutes, can somebody come see the plan? And they could through that Takt plan. The other thing is we published milestones. So the coolest thing I saw the other day, which I just have to brag about, is they showed 4 different columns, and they showed what the building would look like in those 4 different columns on the very top. And this was on a large size printable board. And they showed the milestones under each phase of what would have to be accomplished by that phase. And so in addition to the Takt plan or our graphical schedules, we had snippets in time for the different milestones on the project, and somebody could see easily where we were headed. It was made into a visual. So at this $15 million project, it was very, very neat what we did. For the pull plans, for the make-ready schedules, for the look-aheads, and the weekly work planning, they were all on the same boards. So we had 3 boards there, each of them with 3 or 6 weeks on them. It showed the weekdays and the weekend. And then we had another board which you could slide in front of it and another board. And so all in all, you had 12 weeks there of planning. So here's what we did with the trade partners because they weren't in another system. And this worked out really well. We had our planning boards, and for make-ready schedules that came from pull plans, we would put all of our milestones on those boards from the master schedule. These are the milestones that we had to hit. We would sometimes do pull plans if we could with trade partners. If they had enough time, they had the capability. If not, we would bring trades in one by one and work with them to put their stickies on the boards to plan their work all the way out to about 12 weeks in high level. Then when we got to about 3 weeks, it was more detailed, right? We would do 3 to 6 weeks out ahead, and we would start making work ready. We would start planning work. We would make sure that we were looking for roadblocks 6 weeks out, and we would do that in our weekly meetings. But it was all visual. It was all on stickies, and it was all on the same board. So there weren't separate systems. There weren't separate technologies. There weren't complex strategies on the project side. It was all on these boards. Then when we brought the trades into the trade partner weekly tactical, we were able to create the weekly work plan and refine it from the stickies right there on the boards from the planning that we've already done. And that system was pretty remarkable. And so we would commit to those. And then whether we use stickies, and on this project, we actually use dry erase, if we committed to those, we made sure that that was marked down there, that it had a nice description, and we left there knowing, highlighting the week that was committed to 100% once we went through our normal last planner weekly work planning process. And then that same board was used for day planning. So we would just look at the column for that day and say, okay, for tomorrow, we're doing ... And then we would say also in that daily foreman huddle, that afternoon foreman huddle, what did we accomplish today or yesterday? And we would go through and do check marks or red X's if it was on dry erase, or we would take those stickies and put them into complete or not complete and track the variation, track the root cause there. We would also get the percent plan complete from that. We got our score from that. It was a very simple system. I know some companies like to use BIM 360 Plan. Some people like to use other softwares. We personally use those boards because we had trade partners that maybe didn't even have time to get their iPad and go download the software. They were maybe there for a little bit of time, so they were able to interact with the stickies. Okay, here's the other thing that we did, which was really, really super, super cool. And I hope you love this as much as I do. For a week's worth of time, in addition to that weekly work planning section on the planning boards, we had a 3D isometric of the project that was in a box, and this was a 24 by 24 or 36 by 36 box in an isometric view under a column that said Monday, and there was one for Tuesday, and there was a one for Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. And visually, in our afternoon foreman huddles, we would literally draw where everybody was going to be, where they were going to put materials, where their access was, what they were going to do, and we would do that visually. So if somebody came in, a trade partner that wasn't there all the time, and we wanted them to be on board with these systems, they could look at that isometric, that visual, in that planning meeting with us, and they could be a part of that project and get onboarded more quickly because it was a visual system. We also looked at those pictures, those isometrics, on a daily basis, and it was absolutely fantastic. The other thing that we did was make sure that those pictures were basically just emailed out with the plan for the day out to all the trade partners. So whether you were on the site or not, you got a picture of what work was going on, and you got a list of the things that were discussed. Everybody knew the plan. Those emails were forwarded. Foreman would bring them up on their iPads. And I remember this. This was just a win moment. This was a payday for me. I would go out to the site and I would see foremen with their iPads with that email showing the picture of what's going on and the day plan, showing that to their workers in the crew preparation huddles. I would see my guys, meaning the logistics carpenter on the project site, pulling up the iPad saying, "Hey, Jason, I already know where I'm supposed to be." And I was like, yes, this is working. Everybody knows what's going on. This is scaled. Even if they weren't here yesterday, they have the communication. They know what they're supposed to be doing. It was amazing. So that was the story from that $15 million project that I wanted to share. Really, we need to understand that there are certain key things on large projects, in my opinion, that need to be brought down and adapted to these more complex, smaller, special, mid-sized projects. So the big things that we have on large projects, let me just go through a couple of these. In pre-construction, we develop Takt plans, we develop a master schedule, a logistics drawing, full phasing drawings. Most of the time we do that in 3D, right? We do research of the prime contract, of the Division 1 specs. We do a basis of schedule. We'll typically do a risk analysis. We'll do a fresh eyes meeting for that. We'll make sure that we run that through Acumen Fuse or another industry-leading software to check for schedule health. And we'll go through this process of creating exhibits that go out with the work orders, right? And so in that process, we create the master schedule, the tag plan, the logistics, the phasing, and the basis of schedule. That's the full pre-construction process. And then for large projects, for the schedule, we have the master schedule, we do pull planning, we do make-ready planning, look-ahead planning, weekly work planning, and day planning. The schedule is updated on a weekly basis, and there's a cycle to that. And there are systems in place to make sure that we're managing and using that schedule. It has weekly updates, full KPI reporting, meaning key performance indicators, full KPI reporting on a weekly basis. We use Last Planner system. We use the First Planner system. All the meetings in a meeting system on the weekly meeting system are implemented, and we're ready to go. Now, usually we have the support staff for things like that, and we can do those things. And in the situation that we're in with special, smaller, mid-sized projects, we don't have those same resources, right? So the situation is that those mid-sized projects can be harder. There are less resources, again, like I said yesterday. There are trades there that are there for a shorter amount of time, and we have to discuss those operational control situations and adapt to our special, smaller, mid-sized project sizes. So the industry norm would be just to give up, to not answer those real concerns. Don't ask questions about it, just make it happen, without considering the fewer resources. There's more turnover, and there's little or there's less interest and motivation for trade partners to perform because they're not there as much. So let me talk about some key solutions. These are the things that I would recommend you do to implement operational excellence on your project site. So here we go. In pre-construction, I believe that you would be well served to create a Takt plan for your small, mid-size, or special projects. Do the same thing. Also create a master schedule, but create one that the superintendent can participate with creating or make themselves and will execute. And typically you will want to leave that at just a little bit higher level, because on these smaller projects, you're going to have to be more nimble, more adaptable. I would still really create a nice, wonderfully formatted logistics plan that superintendent can post on the conference room wall with his or her planning boards that is remarkable, that will also allow that to be drawn on with dry erase markers over plexiglass, or maybe it's printed with a special film, but that logistics plan can be referenced on a daily basis and used for planning, used for staging, used for deliveries. Also, even if it's a smaller project, special project, or midsize, we need to have good phasing drawings that will get the trade partners on board for procurement. Now, if we don't do a basis of schedule, we don't do the risk analysis, we don't go do research to see what the contract requirements are, which I would recommend you do, by the way. We need to know what our liquidated damages are. We need to know who owns float. We need to know what to do for impacts. We need to know what the typical submittal return time, RFI return time is. But if we don't create a basis of schedule, I would, at a minimum, put in your work orders the key behaviors that you want on site from a meeting and scheduling standpoint, at a minimum. And then I would, even if you don't do the risk analysis, the acumen fuse analysis, you don't have, let's even say you don't have a builder in pre-construction doing this, I would have a fresh eyes meeting, even if it takes 4 hours, to bring the PM, the superintendent, in on the planning and make sure that before we sign a contract, before we go to a GMP, before we make sure that we lock in this deal, that we have the team's full buy-in on how we're going to go execute this process and execute and build this project. The other thing that I would do, and I'm going to cover these high level because I don't want these podcasts to be too long. Please reach out for help if you need this, but I would make sure that your trailer is properly set up. So you're going to have your normal office areas, you're going to have your orientation area, but make sure that you have a meeting area that will have your planning boards, your logistics plan, your phasing maps, your roadblock maps, and any things that you need for your standard orientation. You have to make sure that space is effective enough for you to go do good quality work and that you have the right support systems. If you don't have a good trailer, then communication starts to break down because it's not visual, right? So on that $15 million project, we had nice, tall, custom-built desks, plan table chairs. We had the right computers and software. We had the right signage in there on the site. We had our right to know area. We had an orientation area with all the standard systems. We had our area where the office manager would just check in once a week or once a month, where we had all our standard filing. We would make sure that we had our little fridge, our little kitchen area in there, no big deal. And then the one thing that we did in that trailer was print out a really nice day plan that was condensed, and it would say who has coverage today, who's locking up, who has orientation, who has this, what's the weather for today, what's the biggest safety focus, so that was listed in there and was a focus for anybody who wanted to participate in that trailer, visited that trailer. Because coverage was such a key thing, because you have fewer resources, it was written down and intentionally done. Then in the conference room, again, logistics plan, phasing drawings, roadblock maps, your planning boards, and there has to be a screen in there for us to interact. And then I would obviously say any other visuals that you want to do to make it a visual system. So please, please, please take time to design your trailer. Do a drawing. If you want help, reach out to me. I can help you with it. The other thing is get your standard meeting system. On a larger project, you'll have team meetings. You'll have the strategic planning and procurement meeting. You'll have BIM meetings. You'll have the OAC meeting. You'll have the trade partner weekly tactical, the afternoon foreman huddles, the worker huddles. You'll have crew preparation huddles. You'll have all of these things on a larger project. On the smaller one, here are the things that I would recommend. You have to have a good, effective team meeting. And you have to, at a minimum, have a time when you update your schedule, your master schedule, and you have to have afternoon foreman huddles and worker huddles. Afternoon foreman huddles, worker huddles. Afternoon foreman huddles, worker huddles. If you have those huddle systems and they're effective and they're run properly, you will get all of your foremen working for you, all of your workers working for you. Those meetings will be more effective, and you will spend less time babysitting and pointing fingers out in the field in your blank space in the time that you're not in meetings. So that has to be set up. Once you have your team, once you have your trade partners on board, once you have your meeting system, once you know that you have a good plan and you have a good schedule and you're ready to drive, you have to have the team with a significant performance challenge to focus on. That's the only thing that will lead everybody together and heading in the same direction. Most of the time, those are milestones. So your master schedule needs to be used as a tool to trigger work, but also to align milestones and procurement, and you have to make sure that's updated weekly. For the smaller, special, mid-sized projects, P6 or your master schedule or whatever you do that schedule in is going to be more front and center even than on the larger projects. I promise you that. And so from that master schedule, you have to make sure on your planning boards that you have milestones that are communicated, that are an aggressive performance challenge for your project team, that are visual, so that even the trade partners that are there sporadically can see where we're headed and allocate manpower. And so they don't just assume that you can have the work done whenever. You have to know when they're on the project site, they have to see how their work affects everybody else. It's super important. Okay, so make ready scheduling is done on those planning boards 120 days out so that people can see when they fit and so that you can schedule those one-offs, those people that aren't there a lot of the time. Then your weekly work plan is created in that trade partner weekly tactical, and it's done together with commitments. You're getting feedback. You know it's realistic. You've allocated manpower, resources, information, equipment. You have everything that you need, and that weekly work plan is a commitment by the team, and that you track that daily with your afternoon foreman huddles. And so you go through those columns on your planning boards, and if you need any of those signs, any of these formats, let me know. I'll give them to you. You just have to reach out. You create a day plan from that. You say, we're going to do ... You update your visual, and then you send that email, that text, that PDF, or whatever you want, or just draw it on the board in a visual and make sure your trade partners just take a picture of it with their iPads as they're going out the room. The key is you need to have in one solid visual place the plan for the next day in a way that everyone can communicate that to the workers. And then the next morning in the worker huddle, you reinforce that verbally with the team in case it doesn't go from the foreman to the workers, and you create that social group. So your day plans are created in the daily foreman huddle. They're visual and they're communicated the next day in the worker huddle. Those worker huddles are super crucial for you on your project site to make sure you're communicating schedule, communicating the plan, and creating the social group. Here's what I mean by that. It will create a checkpoint. Everyone comes to one location. You release them as needed. They know the expectation. They know what you expect. Communication happens. And they also have a feedback loop. If you in your daily habits the day before, where you're doing your afternoon reflection walk, notice some items, you communicate it the next day to the workers and they see that it matters. And so on smaller projects, those habits of reading the drawings, being in the schedule for 30 minutes a day, and taking our reflection walks for that day become even more important because it's a feedback loop that we communicate to foremen in the afternoon and the workers the next morning. The day plan is preferably visually communicated out in the field with all the workers at the huddle location. And like I said, create a single point of entry, stop running around, stop fighting fires, stop communicating for everybody. I was reading again the book Death by Meeting, and Patrick Lencioni mentioned that, people say, hey, I want to get out of this meeting and go do real work, get out of a meeting to communicate so they can just go and independently and individually communicate the things that everyone are confused about by themselves and take 3 or 4 times the amount of time they could have just effectively communicated in the meeting. If superintendents on these smaller, special, mid-sized projects will run these meetings effectively, make it visual, communicate properly, they will not have to go run around and answer all the questions and solve all the problems and communicate and bridge the gap. Everyone will know where they're headed and the job site will be fairly boring. In fact, most of the smaller mid-sized projects where we implement this, the biggest problem is to get the superintendent to not give up on the meeting systems. Because what happens is the superintendent will report back to me and say, Jason, they're boring. They weren't needed anymore. We're covering the same stuff. I stopped doing the meeting. Well, usually 2 weeks after the fact, they call and they're like, hey, I started doing them again because my project spiraled out of control. Well, the boringness, if that's even a word, or the stability came from the fact that these meetings are creating stability. They're reducing your workload. They're increasing your effectiveness, and you get to plan more, do more, control more, participate more in wider company events, be more effective, go home more on time. But superintendents in our industry have gotten addicted. They get this adrenaline rush of, ooh, I'm needed. Ooh, I need to go do this thing over here. Ooh, I'm in a rush. Ooh, I need to, communicate that. Oh, there's an emergency. Oh, whatever. No. That is not the measure of success. The measure of success is that it's boring, it's stable, everyone has what they need, and workers can go be effective in a stable environment. So we need to make sure that those meetings are effective, and that day plan will do that. Also, that the superintendent spends time weekly with the PM, with the PE, talking about procurement. These smaller mid-sized projects, it really comes down to procurement. So we have to have a remarkable procurement log or have the procurement in the master schedule and make sure that the superintendent spends intentional time in procurement meetings now that we've created some capacity there and he or she does not need to be out in the field running around pointing fingers all day. All right, the other thing. The team has to have a visual, fanatical roadblock removal system and huddle with the PM daily, even if it's remotely through Teams or Zoom or Skype or something like that. There has to be a way that everyone on the team, any support system, any support person, any PM knows what the roadblocks are for that project site and help that superintendent remove those roadblocks ahead of time. There has to be a daily fanatical roadblock removal system. I personally prefer writing those on the board so that in the same meeting room location, the afternoon foreman huddle will bring up roadblocks. Here's the roadblocks. Okay, in orientation people see them, in the team meeting people see them, in the OAC people see them. Every day the roadblocks are written in the same place so that they go up on the board and they get removed fanatically. And that's why these meeting areas, this conference room area, is so important. It has to be structured in a way that people can follow the systems on a daily basis. Here's the other thing I like, which I think you'll love. Publish the agendas for the trade partner weekly tactical and the foreman daily huddle and the team meeting. And this will make sure that, like, let's say there's just a PE and a super on the job. Let's say the super is out doing something critical, can't come to the meeting. The agenda is on the wall. A trade partner or the project engineer or anybody can be like, okay, let's just follow the agenda on the wall. Let's go do a shout out. Let's go do the lightning round. Let's go talk about deliveries. Let's do this. What's next? And if you have those agendas visually on that conference room wall, anybody can go cover for that superintendent. And that's when things get remarkable. So the team weekly tactical has to be effective and held on time. It could be like, oh, there's just a couple of us. We don't need to do that. No, you need to plan for PTO. You need to plan for coverage. You need to plan for health. You need to plan for doctor's appointments. You need to plan for quality. The team meetings become more and more important the smaller the team size gets because we have to make sure that there's enough coverage and there usually isn't a redundant system of fallbacks or quality steps or quality points in there there's only one person that's covering these things. And so if there's a need for coverage, we need these team meetings to be catching these things. Okay. Coverage has to be discussed at least weekly, if not daily, in the team huddle. Trade partners being graded. I've talked about this in the safety section, and I'll talk about this again. For operational items, there's nothing better. There's nothing better than trade partners being graded by the general contractor on a weekly basis to make sure that things are cared for the way that they need to be cared for. All of your C, D, and F players will rise to B's and A's, and that transparent, open grading competition will rise everybody to the occasion. And when you do that, I will say one more time, the burden is reduced on the superintendent. Trade partners start doing their jobs more and more, and the culture of the local community, the local workforce, the owners, the company, everything, it starts to increase and creates this culture of accountability, and things really get remarkable. And like I said on the safety one, you have to start by grading yourself by having good bathrooms, good lunch area, good equal communication, worker huddles, and treat trade partners with respect if you're going to grade them. And then again, the quality process is managed in team meetings as the main focus on the project site. If you do these things that I've just mentioned as a minimum, you have the ability to have operational control as long as you make cleanliness, organization, and safety your key focuses, that you strive for perfection, and that you use accountability systems like the texting system and zero tolerance to correct bad behavior. And if you do that, even on the smaller projects, you could go have plenty of time to do your job. Like for instance, and I'm not bragging, I'm just giving everyone hope. If you put me on a $2 million job or a $7 million job or a $15 million job, I would find a way to work it to where I effectively communicated in the meetings, took a field walk twice or 3 times a day, and I wouldn't be out there like just working all day, fighting fires, behind the 8 ball, answering questions, communicating, pointing fingers. I wouldn't do it. And I would have 3/4 of my day free for production work, for reading the drawings, for being in the schedule, for planning, for coordinating, for looking into the future and seeing the future. And I'm not bragging. I'm just saying, if I can do it, you can do it, because I'm not any smarter than you are. So I hope this helps. Tips and tricks for this one more time. Have somebody help out at first to get the project set up. If you're not familiar with these systems, have some facilitation as you go. Get a consultant, reach out to me, have somebody help you. It's not a big deal to get help. If you spend a little bit of money, it's okay, because then you're able to go run it on by yourself. And once you have one project that's operational excellent with a superintendent that's happy and healthy at home, that will start to scale because everyone will know how to do it. Remember, adapt all your systems to the superintendent. I remember doing a field walk one time with a superintendent doing a TI, and the problem was he had the plan in his head. Nobody else could see the plan, and the project was failing. And the scheduler was like, well, I've been trying to get him to use P6 for a long time and use these softwares. And then I finally just looked over because I could see something was wrong. And I was like, if we got you a big 36 by 48 sheet of graph paper, would you make your own schedule, visually show it to the trade partners, and start these meetings? And he was like, well, heck yeah. And I was like, we have to tailor it to the super. Got him some graph paper. He lined out the schedule and immediately started these systems and was immediately effective, and things changed almost overnight for him. We have to make sure that we tailor everything, adapt all systems to the capabilities, to the aptitude, to the style of the superintendent on site, and to the size of the project, and to the resources that are available. And there are almost an infinite amount of ways that we can adapt things to those projects. But I will say, do not underestimate the trade partner grading. Do not avoid doing that. If you don't grade your contractors, you're not going to make this work. And let me just say a couple things as I close. And I'm not being negative. I'm just trying to do this for impact. If you do not grade your contractors, this won't work. If you don't have an accountability system like zero tolerance for people on site, it won't work. Typically, if you don't find a way to get a little bit of some labor or carpenter help on site, it won't work. If you don't have your trailer set up properly, it won't work. If you don't have visual communication for the schedules, it won't work. If you don't have a fanatical roadblock system, it won't work. And if you don't have coverage on your site intentionally planned in team meetings, it won't work. You can do almost anything else. You can vary on anything else, adapt to anything else, but you have to have those key things. So I hope this helps. The vision for this is that you feel like after this podcast, wow, I can go implement a couple of these things. The last planner system isn't that complex. Weekly work planning isn't that complex. These huddle systems aren't complex. I know that Jason has the agendas for all of these things. I know I can get a little bit of help. Man, I'm going to go implement these things on the project site. And as a company, we will do better. I'll have more time at home. Unless you don't like your family. If you don't like your husband or wife at home, then I guess don't do these things, but, and find a way to stay at work. But if you do these things, you can reduce the time that you're needed. You can go home on time. You can be less stressed. You can have trade partners do their job that they're supposed to be doing, and you can have a remarkable life and run a remarkable project. And for the purpose, again, for the workers, to keep people safe, to protect and preserve families, and to have a remarkable experience yourself, because there's no reason to not live a remarkable life. I hope this helps. In the meantime, let's go ahead. Let's get started. Let's get our trailer set up. Let's decide on our meetings. Let's make sure we have an org chart identified. Let's make sure we have a significant performance challenge, that we get these scheduling systems in place, visually communicated, and get people in there, hold them accountable, don't tolerate bad behavior, grade your contractors, get reciprocity, get some goodwill with your trade partners by having nice bathrooms, nice lunch area, nice working environment, and focus on cleanliness, organization, and safety as your top priorities. Because again, and I don't mean this offensively, but it is true, if a superintendent cannot control cleanliness, he or she cannot control anything, and you are on your way for a failed project. So I hope this helps. Until we meet again, on we go.
Please join us next time in elevating the entire construction experience for workers, leaders, and companies coast to coast. If you're enjoying the show, please feel free to share with your construction colleagues and help us spread the word by rating, subscribing, and leaving a review on your preferred podcast listening platform. We really appreciate it. We'll catch you next time on the Elevate Construction Podcast.